What's up, guys? Welcome to another Unscripted review, and this one is pretty appropriate for the current climate since the world is sort of in this very bizarre and chaotic state. Why not talk about a show where the bizarre and chaotic are actually pretty normal? Yes, this is a review of Blockade Battlefront. So let's get started. So this show would have never been on my radar if a fan hadn't given it to me back when I went to RTX a couple years ago, and thank you so much, because this show has easily made its way into my top ranks in anime just because of, well, everything I'm about to talk about, but I just wanted to point that out because this is one of those shows that can sort of easily slip under the radar if you're not looking for it. And so because I wasn't looking for it, it kind of took somebody actually putting it in my hands to watch it, and I've been hooked ever since, and I'm begging for a season 3. That does kind of give away my thoughts on the show, but don't worry, there's a lot more that we can talk about here. So like I said at the start of this review, this is a very bizarre and sort of chaotic environment in the show, and I'm going to get into the world itself in a minute, but first I want to talk about the characters, because there are so many characters in just the first season, and then more introduced later on in the second season, that are just so cool and yet to really be explored. So like Leonardo Watch, our main character, he actually is pretty well explored. We know that he has the all-seeing eyes of the gods. He was actually visiting this world of Hellsalem's lot that I'll talk about in a minute. He was visiting it with his sister to hope that maybe she would be able to walk again, and instead he gets really cool eyes and she goes blind. Good start to the family road trip, I suppose. But in this instance, he's sort of thrown into this world of uncertainty and forced to sort of adapt and sort of come to grips with where he's at, how he's going to figure things out, and just sort of, at the start, meandering from place to place until he finds his place in Libra, while still also working a second job. He's a very driven character. It's pretty cool, but we get quite a bit of elaboration with him in this first season, despite the fact that a lot of this first season is sort of an anime only, at least once it starts to really delve into the characters of White and Black. But we have other characters like Klaus, Steven Starface, Zap, Zed. We get a bit of backstory with Zed by the second season, but a lot of these characters chain. We don't really know a whole lot about the history of these characters, and it sort of lends to your investment in the world because you don't know a lot about these characters, but, you know, contextually, they are actually working for a secret organization. So it makes sense that they don't really get a whole lot of backstory that you don't know about, but it makes that sort of mystery even more enticing because you're just begging to learn more about these characters that you're spending so much time with. But it works for the story to some degree because you are following from mostly the perspective of Leonardo Watch, and he doesn't really know a lot about the history of these characters either. He just knows that this world's weird, and that's just what it is. And speaking of weird, something that is kind of weird about this series is the fact that the latter portion of the first season actually focuses on 2 anime-only characters, which generally when I think of an anime-only sort of arc or an anime-only sort of segment of a story, I tend to consider it not as good as the rest of the series because it's obviously not something put in the manga. But this is one of the few instances that I've come across where the ending of this arc, without spoiling anything, and the overall tone is basically unchanged between manga and the anime, and it actually really surprised me because I was expecting, you know, Hellsing original or Full Metal original sort of style where it's not bad, but clearly not what was originally written. But like now that I know that it was an anime only, it sort of shows, but really not enough for the casual viewer to sort of hone in on it. And I think the main reason for that is because the viewer, you and I, are both just sucked into the chaos and overwhelming nature of Hellsalem's lot, also formerly known as New York City. Now, I did in this series watch it first in the dub, and actually I did a reaction of that, which has since been taken down, unfortunately, but then afterwards I went and watched the subbed version, and I feel the same way with this show as I do about Black Butler. The dub, just because of the location, the setting of this show, just feels more correct. You know, Black Butler felt correct because everybody had British accents. This feels correct because they're in New York and everybody speaks English and does a pretty good job of being sort of that special brand of New York City asshole.
What's up? Getting ready to die, dickhead?
Not even close, you evil sheep, bitch.
Especially Zap. Now, like a lot of TV shows and actually movies now that I think about it, that take place in New York, this show actually does sort of the extreme version of treating New York like a character, which a lot of TV shows and movies do. It's sort of its own entity. A perfect example of this that comes right off the top of my head is the Into the Spider-Verse movie. That really does kind of treat New York City as a character, but Blood Blockade kind of takes that up to 11. Quite possibly because there are elements of the city that are now sentient because of everything that's happened, but they sort of revamp New York City as Hellsalem's Lot, which it's cool because there are elements throughout the series that you can sort of recognize as New York City style. For example, the diner that always gets destroyed, or the different skyscrapers, the long straight roads with traffic. All of those things feel very New York City-esque. But take that insanity of regular old New York and now add monsters, crime that is now superpowered instead of just your regular crimes, the different threat levels, the different abilities all these other characters have, all of those lumped in with the fact that New York already has a sort of crazy aesthetic, and you've got yourself one hell of a character in this entire setting. And I feel like it just fits the tone so well because you already know New York is crazy, and they just say, let's make it more crazy, and they nail it. And that is due in no small part to the art design, because my God, they pulled out all the stops for the way that this show looks. They've got sort of this matte painting design, reminds me a lot of some of the older paintings of New York that you see as backgrounds that the characters then interact on. It's 3D enough that the characters are believably interacting with it, but it's got this flat, two-dimensional art style that just reminds me of these old school paintings. I forgot to mute my watch again. But alongside this beautiful still imagery with the other characters interacting with the foreground of it, they do pull out the stops even more when the scenes call for it, especially in moments where Yutaka Nakamura takes the reins. Yes, I know I mention him a lot whenever he comes up, but his fight scenes are a masterclass in 2D animation fight scenes. I mean, like, look, this is episode 1. Like, look at that. Who puts that much detail into a freaking lighter being lit? Like, come on. It's incredible. So they're clearly not afraid to pull out the stops and make everything go nuts when the time calls for it, which they do in both the first season and the second season. And they actually have Yutaka Nakamura animate this hilarious moment of, well, just look.
You're a liar!
A kid insulting his mother, and they pull him in to do that. I love it. It's such a great sense of humor. And it is. The show has such an incredible sense of humor, but can get serious when it needs to. And it sort of does show the kind of bipolar nature of the setting in this show, because it goes from this very serious, very strict, very action with a lot of force behind it to Zap. He's a perfect example.
Are you the freaking devil?
Find my cat, I'll pop your dick like a balloon animal!
Speaking of things that seem like a bipolar decision, I know that's a terrible segue, but it'll make sense in a minute. The music in this show, if you look at it, doesn't really seem to mesh, but yet it does. Let me explain. So right off the bat, up until this show came out, I had not seen a perfect blend of English-speaking jazz with anime since Cowboy Bebop. And coming from my personal preferences, that is damn high praise. The jazz in this, like Catch Me If You Can, perfect song.
Catch me if you can, oh darling, you are so charming.
But then you get into your traditional sounding Japanese openings, like the second opening, the first opening, and then you have the ending, which is this other jazz-sounding song. And then you get season 2, and it's like, is that French? Yeah, it's French music. Sure, why not? Throw it in there. I don't know. There's so many different music choices in this show that don't seem to make any sense, but when you see them in context, they are incredibly well-timed. They're perfectly placed, and just listening to the track on its own without having any sort of context to it, I just think that it's a shuffled playlist, and then you realize it's all within the same OST. It's so cool. So I'm going to gloss over the second opening just because it does have more of your standard anime opening trope to it, with a bit of a twist because it is such a bizarre show. But the opening for the first season is genius in a lot of ways. So here's what I mean. The opening has this sort of build up to it where you sort of get brought up to speed with the energy of the show, And the song itself is called Hello World, which is very appropriately named considering that this entire series just bombards you with this entirely unique and new world, and you kind of just have to catch up along with the rest of the characters. And it's very appropriately named, but when it opens, it's very laid back. You kind of get this feeling of like, oh, this is, interesting. I kind of like that. And then it kicks into the main portion of the song, and you get the action, you get the energy, and it all just flows really well. And I feel like setting the appropriate expectations for the energy of this show is just so important, because the story itself is just incredible. I'm not going to dive too deeply into the story because I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't seen it, because, spoilers, this is going to end up with a recommendation for you to watch it by the end. But this show, setting an expectation of energy, is very appropriate due to the fact that the story itself is so much larger than life. There's the king of depravity, there's these monsters that have spent centuries improving their skills on a chess game of sorts, these different entities that you aren't sure whether or not they are real or myth, or, chances are with the way this series goes, they're probably real. There's vampires, there's, the actual fall that we get to see a little bit more in the second season, all these different things that just feel so much bigger than life. And the story threads that they leave behind have me begging for a third season, because every character, even Zap, is likable to some degree. Every power seems to have more to it than what we've been initially shown. Every freaking skill set, story thread, song, everything just is so big and makes you feel like you're part of this massive world that you otherwise would not have even been aware of. And you probably are just now becoming aware of it if you're clicking on this randomly. And here's the point where I say, I highly recommend watching this show. It is an incredible series, and if you aren't watching it or haven't watched it yet, you are doing yourself a disservice. And come on, what else do you have to do right now? You're locked inside like I am and slowly losing your mind. I don't know if it's Easter yet or if it's, a Monday. Actually, no, I think it's Thursday. So while the world is in this bizarre, chaotic mess, why not watch a show where New York City is a bizarre, chaotic mess like it is in real life, but this version's a lot more fun. Either way, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this unscripted review. I am trying to improve the format a little bit, but of course there's only so much I can do with an unscripted review. I'm basically trying to set a couple guide markers so that I don't go too far off topic. But if you guys enjoy this series, make sure to leave it a like, make sure to comment and subscribe and all that fun stuff if you haven't already, and give the show a watch. I've got the Blu-ray there, but you obviously don't have to go and do that. You can probably just watch it on Funimation or Crunchyroll. I will say, like I sort of alluded to earlier, the dub of this series is surprisingly rock solid, and especially considering it takes place in the former city of New York, it is fairly appropriate the way that it sounds. So I would watch it that way if you're into that. If not, the sub is still good. So yeah, just enjoy. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there, and have a good one. I have shirts. Please buy a shirt if you want to, or a sweatshirt. I'm getting desperate now. I'm just recording stuff whenever I can at the very end of videos, because I'm starting to do context-specific endings, and I'm running out of ideas. So just go buy it, please. Don't be shirtless like Inosuke. If you want to save some, go SFMH. Put that as the code when you go to buy it and save 10%. Please, yeah, that's my spiel. See ya.